tonight a question that I'm going to open up with for you. And my question to you is this. So last week my question was, let me start with that. Last week my question was this. What do you do when you don't get what you were waiting for? So that's what we talked about last week. What happens when the wait does not produce what you were waiting on? This week my question to you is this. What is the church to be doing while we're waiting on God? What is the church to be doing while we wait on God? Every one of us in here probably would give a good answer and say, or we're supposed to be witnesses. Matthew 28, the Great Commission, that's what we're supposed to be doing. He said, go into all ye parts of the world, go everywhere and proclaim the gospel. We're supposed to be witnesses to Christ. That is true. That is a good example. We're supposed to win souls. Okay? So my next question to you is, how many souls have you won in this last year in Christ? And it's honestly is a thought-provoking thought that if we think and believe what we say we believe, then how many people have we won to Christ? I know that all the time we probably share the gospel in our lifestyle, and we probably do those things, but how many have we really led to Christ in the sinner's prayer? I mean, if we sing in the altars lately, we may see people in the altar all the time for different needs and those kind of things, but are we doing what the Great Commission says? Are we winning souls? So if we're not, then we're missing the mark somewhere. Okay? Are we witnessing? Are we sharing the good news? Well, Pastor, you don't understand where I work at. Pastor, you don't understand school. Pastor, you don't understand this. Pastor, you don't understand that. But what about all the places that we go to outside of our 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 job, or outside our work hours, and all the people that we're involved in? What about our friends? What about different ones? And you say, well, Pastor, I am, but nobody's coming. Do you believe Jesus is coming back? Do you believe it's soon? Do you believe it's urgent? I say that tonight not to point fingers at you, because I believe the whole church has work to do. I believe even myself, there's still work to do. I think sometimes as a pastor, even with me, even now getting out of the community more, getting involved more, sometimes we feel pressured to say the right thing or do the right thing or to give the political answer or whatnot. We all have that pressure on us. We all have that pressure where we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. But are we praying for those opportunities? Are we praying for the opportunity to lead people to Christ? So my question is, again, what are we doing while we're waiting on God? While we're waiting for His return, what is the church doing? And so I think tonight, I want us to turn to Hebrews 12 and 1. I'm going to start there, and I have a couple of scriptures that I want to read tonight, but I'm going to start with Hebrews 12 and 1. Hebrews 12 and 1. Got it? Close to it? King James reads it this way. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. I'm going to read it from the New Century Translation. It says, we have around us many people whose lives tell us what faith means. So let us run the race that is before us and never give up. We should remove from our lives anything that would get in the way and the sin that so easily holds us back. So the first thing that I'd like to say to us tonight as a church, okay? I believe that we, even if we get saved and we are saved and on our way to heaven and we got that checked off of our list, I believe there's still work for the church to do, and the first thing that we need to do is we need to lay aside the things that are holding us back. Whether it's attitude, whether it's a physical sin, whether it's an inward emotional sin, whether it's a thoughts. Even the Bible talks about our thoughts. Okay, the Bible talks about taking captive those thoughts. And so there are things that we need to be doing while we're waiting on Christ. And we need to first work on us. Before we can help anybody else, we got to help us. Before we can be any good to anybody else, we got to work on us. Now, that's not to say that along the way that you've got to be perfect. Because I believe that we are a work in progress and that we will be a work in progress until Jesus comes, because we are in an imperfect body, in an imperfect world, and an imperfect situation. So therefore, those things affect us. And so we have to learn daily how to put aside the things that are affecting us, the things that are slowing us down, the things that are keeping us from reaching our goal. It's funny that he compares it to a race here, and it is achievable. He encourages and says it's achievable because there is a cloud of witnesses that are a witness to this faith. So you can do it. If you'll look back over history at the other people who have done it, you can do it. It is achievable. It is attainable. God never asks us to do anything that is not obtainable. God will never ask us to do anything that we cannot achieve. God only asks us to do what we're capable of doing. Do you believe that tonight? I know that sometimes it feels like, God, I just can't do this. Sometimes the enemy will tell you, you're going under, you're going to sink, you're not going to win, you can't do this, you're not good enough, you're not going to accomplish anything. Okay? You've got to take captive your thoughts. You've got to take those thoughts captive. Some of you tonight have inner thoughts that fight you more than the physical things. Oh, I got an amen there. I hit a nerve somewhere. Woo! Sometimes that inward man, that inward struggle can be worse than anything. How you treat yourself, how you look at yourself based on how you think of yourself. But not only that, what about the thoughts that the enemy plants in your mind? What about the seeds of doubt that he plants in your mind? What about the things that he constantly reminds you of? We've got to realize that the Word of God says that he casts it as far as the east is from the west. So if you start going east, you're going to always go east, and you're never going to run out of east. You're never going to run into west because you're constantly going east if you go that way. So that's what the Bible's talking about. You're never going to run into the west as long as you're walking eastward. He cast it that far that it's never going to run back around unless you allow it to run back around. Unless you allow it to come back up. Unless you allow other people to put those thoughts in your mind. Unless you let other people remind you of who you used to be instead of who you are now. Sorry. Somebody trying to get in contact with me. And the enemy loves to do that. He loves to get you right by yourself and all up in your feelings. All in your emotions. And loves to tell you everything that's wrong with you. And it's easier for us to accept what's wrong with us instead of us to accept what we're doing right. And I've never understood that. I've never understood why it is so easy for us to grab hold of all the negative. But yet, when God speaks positive in us, we just don't believe it. We just don't have the faith to believe it, but we have faith to believe all the negative. How can you have faith to believe one, but not faith to believe the other?
Sometimes it can be taught that way. You know, some parents teach they don't intentionally do it, but it happens.
Mm-hmm.
It all depends on the household that you're in. And if your parents are not motivating you to be good, if they just constantly belittle you and put you down, it don't matter what you do. That's the way you're going to
And as a child, the parent is responsible. But when you're no longer a child, the Bible says that we have to put aside childish ways, which means I have to grow up and I've got to do something different. So just because my daddy said that I was a nobody, now I've got to look at myself and say, I can't allow that person to speak in me anymore. I've got to do it, which is why I say it's a process. And it says right here, you lay aside the heavy weight that besets you. Not your daddy's going to lay it down, your mama's going to lay it down. You have to make that choice to lay it down. I've had people talk to me before about their upbringing and would say, well, you got to realize I wasn't taught how to love, so therefore I really don't know how to love. I know how to be physical, but I don't really know how to love, okay? And then you'll have some people that will also say, oh, I don't know how to be a father. Well, what you don't know how to do, what do? You learn how to do it. If you know what the problem is, then now you got to fix it and stop using that as an excuse. And I think sometimes that what happens is, and I think this is where the weight is, not that it happened, not that you went through it. I often said that about my dad, and if he's listening, I don't think he would take offense, but I often said that about my dad. My dad was hard. He was a tough man, but his own way, he loved us, and he showed us that love and whatnot. But when we talk about his family, he was never, ever shown that love. He was never shown a Christian home. He was never shown what it was to be in a home not fighting and beating on your wife. He lived in a home where you were taught that a woman was submissive after you beat her, or a child was submissive after you beat them. Not spank them, beat them. And so for him, he was very hard and calloused. With my brother, he fathered him different. There was 11 years between them. He was an alcoholic when that first 11 years of my brother's life. Then he got saved. I came along. He was a completely different father. Completely different father. But I look back now and him almost 76 years old, and I can see the growth even in our whole life, even to the point now that when I call him, I love you, I'm praying for you. But growing up, my dad didn't say that a lot. If you told him you loved him, he said, you too. Then he grew in to tell me he loved me later. But it was still a work in progress. And now at 76 years old, I joke about it and say, man, it took you 76 years to mellow out in bed and tell me you love me. And we joke about it. But honestly, it did. Because he had to change a mindset. And that's I'm telling you, your mind is the hardest thing to conquer. It is. You can I see people talk about laying down things that they do physically. Well, the things you physically do, people can hold you accountable for it. People can look at you and they can see when you tell them, I'm trying to stop this. Okay, when you go on a diet. Here's my point in case. Andrea told me this week, she come into the office and I said, ooh, I don't like you. And she said, what, Pastor? I said, here we are in the office. You come in. She had went to Cinnabon. And she come back in the office the next morning and had a big cinnamon roll about this big with extra icing on it. And she went to the microwave and warmed it up on top of it and got the whole place smelling like Cinnabon. And then come down and sit in the office and she goes, well, I was going to bring you one. But I didn't want to be a stumbling block to you. What do you think you're doing now?
Now you didn't smell it all day.
Right. So I got to smell it all day. And she says, but you told me you were going to the gym and you were trying to do better. I'm just trying to hold you accountable, that's all. Well, those are physical things. Those are things that I said. But she doesn't know the things up here that I'm holding captive that I haven't told her yet that I'm faking. And so you're right. That mental side is the hardest thing to lay aside. The mental, we learned that even with children, working with child services. Y'all know my history working with child services, working with advocacy program. The hardest thing to determine or to defend is emotional abuse. Because there's no marks that you can see. So how do you carry the court when you don't have any marks? And so it's so hard to catch it because then that parent or whoever will come in the presence of everybody and they're just sweet, loving, and everything else. And then when the person walks out the door, they talk to that child like they're trash, tell them they're worthless, they're not going to accomplish anything, you're never going to be anybody, call them all kind of names, and that's what you're talking about. But then when everybody else comes around, now they see, here's the fake side. And then we have people go through life that's how they learn how to engage with people. But I'll tell you what I told somebody today. We don't always know what to pray for, but the Holy Spirit does. And they looked at me, and I said, we don't always know what we need, but the Holy Spirit prays for you in mysteries, because there's things that we don't know that we need. There are things when you start praying about yourself and asking God, what needs to be fixed in me? And He starts revealing those things. I have seen it more times than not. People getting closer to God. I mean, they're drawing closer, and they're getting closer and closer and closer, and all of a sudden, when that mirror gets close enough that they reveal, and God reveals who they truly are and what He wants to change in them and what He wants them to do, they begin to step away. God, I didn't want you to deal with that. That was private. God, I don't want to bring that up. I've pushed that down, God. I don't want to bring that up. But yet we're praying, God, make us a better person. God, help us to deal with things in our heart. God, help us to deal with this. God, reveal this. And then when God does it, we get scared and run. And we go back into that child mode instead of the conqueror that He's created us to be. Because by yourself, you can't face it. You can't. It would honestly scare you to death and would drive you insane if you faced it by yourself. But that's why it says you can. Because when we start looking at Abraham, we start looking at Moses. Look at Moses. He had an identity crisis. But he's one of the great faith. He's one of the great warriors that God talks about. He's one of the people that He says look up to in the Hall of Fame of faith. But yet Moses, out of all people, had identity crisis. His mama, she was doing something to save him, and yet she put him right in the palace with the king and the king's daughter who adopted him. And then he finds out they ain't even my people. Wait a minute, who am I? Has anybody ever woke up one day and thought, God, who am I? Who am I? Who have you made me to be, God? And Moses is going through this identity crisis. And now God is having to reveal to him who he is while he works for God. While he's on a mission and serves God. That's exactly where God calls us at. He's revealing to us every day who we are, what He wants to change in us, how He wants to mature us while we still work and do service for Him. And it ain't easy. It ain't easy. So to answer that question, I think I answered it, but to say it very simple, are you going to answer to what they say you are or who He says you are? And we have to sometimes take captive those thoughts long enough to say, God, who do you say I am?
But it beats you up when you're by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely beats you the hardest when you're by yourself. When you got your mind out and you got so much to think of. And that's why I read so much, because I don't want to be weak at that moment. I don't want to do the things my kid that my parents did to me. And he did to my mom. You know, that's hard for a kid to go through. When you see him mistreating you and your mom. You know, but you still love him because you don't hate him. That's your daddy.
Right.
You can't hate him.
Right.
But I hate what he did.
Right. And that's
I'm
okay.
making the same mistake with my kid. And that's why I'm so close to him. Because I know what I went through, and I would never put nobody else through it. It just get hard.
But as hard as it is, you still recognize it. And that's a step ahead. Because you can recognize it, and you're open to recognizing it. So to me, that's telling me that's a step closer to God. That's a step ahead because you're willing for God to reveal it to you. And even though it's hard, God has given you a way to cope with it, and that is, God, I'm going to stay in your word. I don't know what else to do but stay in your word. But I think, too, that eventually we have to release ourselves from that bondage.
I think as kids, you feel like it's your fault. You made me do the thing. Why would you take it?
Because that's what the adult does, and that's what the enemy does. The enemy always turns the guilt back around on you. The very thing that the enemy will tempt you to do. How many of you have ever been tempted? And the enemy is telling you, just do it. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. How many of you have been in a situation where the Spirit of God, or you know just from your conscience, it's not the right thing to do? Don't do that. Don't do it. The enemy's going, it won't hurt. It really ain't going to hurt that bad. You saved enough that God will forgive you. If you do mess up, God will forgive you. And the whole time the enemy's telling you these things, and then when you do it, the enemy says, you weren't as saved as you thought you were. The very thing that he tempted you and pushed you to do is the very thing that he uses to condemn you with. Well, that's the same thing with this situation. It's the enemy. It's the enemy that puts that thought there because you do love them. And so you're looking for an answer. And as a child, you do not have the cognitive ability to answer those questions and to understand why daddy or mama's doing what they're doing. And so all of a sudden, the only conclusion that you can come up with is my fault. If I would just have been nice, if I'd have made better grades, if I would have cleaned my room, if I would have X, Y, Z, daddy wouldn't have done that, but it's my fault. Because you're looking for an answer to explain it. That's why. And in a child's mind, it's easier to take it on because a lot of times the adult will turn and say, if you hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have beat you. If you hadn't acted the way that you act. How many times have I heard women who were abused and they'd be scared to leave the abuser because the abuser did take care of them financially or cared for them in the house or whatever. But then the abuser would look at them and say, why did you make me do that? Why did you make me hit you? Why? And they put the blame back on the victim. Because you were the victim as a child. Not the overcomer. At that point, you were the victim and you were not mature enough to understand what the enemy was doing. And the reason you felt that way because it was a trap that the enemy is trying to use for years later to have a weight around your neck like a noose. To have a millstone around your neck and hold you down. And you're not the only one. There's some more people in here that the same thing has happened to. There's more people that still carry that weight. And that's what I'm talking about tonight. This is exactly what I'm talking about tonight. That we're effective only to a point. But I really feel like that there's freedom that God wants to give us and wants us to live in and operate at a different capacity and a different point and not walk around with that millstone on our neck. Because what happens is we'll pick that millstone up and we'll carry it for a while where it's not choking us. And then all of a sudden we get tired of carrying it and we drop it. And then it's pulling at us and choking us. And it's choking the very life out of us. So it's strategic. Because the enemy tries to get you when you're young. Even having praying parents. I still was molested as a child. Why? Because the enemy was trying to get me while I was young. Because I didn't have the ability to understand what he was doing. And I didn't have the ability to reason out that it was not my fault. So for 25 years of my life, I said it was my fault that I would put myself in the wrong place at the wrong time. If I hadn't have done this, and I've replayed it probably 1,000 times in my mind, and if you hadn't have done this, you probably would. And one day God said, hold on! You were a child. And the enemy was after you. That's all the explanation we give. You were a child. You were immature. The enemy was after you. He was coming to kill, steal, and destroy because I have a purpose for you. Period. He wants to steal our purpose. He wants to steal the plan that God has for us. And he knows the capability that he has when he attacks us at a young mind. And if he can get you early, the chances are he will even have you all the way up to your death unless you let God heal that place. And the only way God can heal it is through faith. Just like our salvation is by faith. I told someone else today, I said, can I tell you something? They said, well, Pastor, if you're not careful, you get to reading all this stuff, and you'll get to looking into the history and looking at all these theories, and before you know it, you'll thank God right out of existence. I said, that's exactly what the enemy wants you to do. I said, that's why we don't live only by what we can read and understand, because the Word of God says in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, lean not into your understanding, because your understanding will lead you astray. And so therefore, even with things of the past, sometimes we have come up with an answer because it helps ease the pain. We've come up with an answer because, oh, it helps me to get through the day if I think this way. But it's your understanding. And what we really need is to have an encounter with Christ and let Him give us some impartation. Let Him give us some understanding. Let Him put in us the things that were not put in us at an early age. Let Him breathe on us. You know, we have all these cliches we say in the church that say, breath of God, breathe on me. But there's some truth to it that God has to breathe into us and breathe life into us. And God has to speak into us the things that we don't always get from the people that should have gave it to us. Now, that took a totally different turn from where we were going, but that's all right. Oh, but we can make it. And that's what he talks about the Hall of Fame examples. We can make it. And our first job while we're waiting on God is let God deal with us. Let God deal with us. Friday, April the 3rd, Saturday, April the 4th, and Sunday, April the 5th. We're going to have a weekend revival. A healing and deliverance revival. I have Pastor Scotty Herndon, who was here a couple years ago, is going to come one night. Javaris and April Wright is going to come one night. If you went to the leadership conference, he was the guy that sang. They're going to come. And then Dee and Coy are going to be here as well on that Sunday. I've asked Dee and Coy to deal with financial breakthrough and the spirit of poverty. Because there's some of us that we live penny to penny, and it seems like that we are stuck in it, and that the devil has a vice on our finances. There are some of us that are dealing with mental pain and things that we need to be delivered from. And then there's some of us that are dealing with physical pain that we need to be delivered from. And so I've really been praying about this and praying and asking God what He wanted us to do and how He wanted us to do it. And the guy that we were having come for pastor appreciation was unable to do it that day. And I said, guess what? Instead of spending more money on another pastor, another room, can we just do it that weekend and that Sunday have a meal for pastor appreciation? I said, because they know me, know who I am. Let them say a couple of things, and let's move on and have church. What better pastor appreciation could we have than to let's just live what God is doing and doing in us. So we're going to have a weekend revival. So let me go ahead and put this plug in there right now. It's the weekend before spring break. Don't go on spring break till Monday. You got a whole week. But come and let's get delivered, let's get refreshed, and let's let God do something in us. And then we go on spring break and after we are healed, okay? So I just want to throw that in there. Amen. So the first weekend in April, revival, weekend revival, okay? For all you listening, first weekend in April, 3rd, 4th, and 5th. Amen. All right, where am I going with this? Flip over to, and we may stop with this one tonight. Flip over to James 5, 7 through 11. I think this goes right along with what we were just talking about, so maybe this will give us some more understanding. James 5, 7 through 11. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, until he receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge no one against another. Brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge stands before the door. Take my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Before we first thing it says, be, what's that P word?
Patient.
Whew, Jesus. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience. Well, it's just what we were just talking about. We've got to be patient while we wait on God, but God is being patient with us too, which is why God is delaying his coming. Because God is a merciful God. God doesn't want anyone to perish. God wants us to get us right. And he's given us that opportunity to get us right. And he's a patient God waiting on the fruit to ripen. He's waiting on you to ripen. He's waiting on us to allow him to work our junk out. Whether it's physical, mental, whatever. He's working on us. We are a work in progress. And so while we wait, we've got to wait patiently. But also, while he works on us and while we are working to work our mess out, we got to be patient. Because I don't know if you're like me or not. There are times I'm like, okay, God, I see what the problem is. Can you fix this? I want a vending machine, Jesus. I want to go push the number and say, I want this in my life. Push it, press it, bam, it comes out. But God's a process. You know why? We couldn't handle it if he did it that way. If God just starts snatching things and pulling things and everything else, we would lose our identity and lose our mind too. That's why he doesn't always work that way, because we are a ball of emotion. We are people of feeling. We are people of emotion. And so therefore, God has to work with us tenderly. He has to work with us in patience. And he has to let us work up to him doing his work in us. And so God is patient toward us. There's people quite often that will say, why did God take this person but leave that person? Because he's a merciful God. Maybe that person made everything right and he was ready to go, or she was ready to go, but that person, maybe they got in a car wreck and they're not ready, or maybe they're straight up what we would say just a bad person. And why did God leave them here? Because he's merciful. And he wishes that no man or woman should perish. And so he's patient with them. He's given them time to get it right. He's given them time to work on them. He's given them time for the laborer to come to them. Because God's a merciful God. God doesn't want any of us to perish. God doesn't want any of us to suffer. Do y'all remember when we were talking about spiritual warfare? I think it's been about 6 months ago. It might have been longer than that. And we were talking about the temple and how the temple was broken up into 91 rooms. 90? One of those. It's broken up into a lot of rooms, okay? When you look at the Temple of Solomon, it's broken up into like 90 rooms, and it talks about the temple and what those rooms are. And then we were reading a book by Alexander Pagani, and he talked about how that us, as a temple, we were broken up into many rooms, and it's just like at your house. In your house, you may let me come in the kitchen, you may let me come in the living room, but you got that one room that's got all that stuff in it. And that's the room that you keep closed, keep the light off, and you say, can I go to the bathroom? Yeah, go to the bathroom, but do not go to the door on the left over here or the one on the right. It's the first door. Don't go past that door, because if you do, you're going to get lost in that room. That's how our life is sometimes. Our life is just like that. We let people see the rooms that we want them to see. We'll let them into the living room of our life because that one's clean. We'll let them into the child room of our life because that one's clean, but I may not let you into the husband room of my life because that one might not be clean. I'll let you into the brother room of my life, but I'm not going to let you into the friend room of my life. That's why when people get married, and even though you're supposed to be one, and you're bringing all your baggage into that marriage, we'll still only let that person so far into our life, and that person doesn't understand what's going on with you, or what makes you tick, or what makes you talk, because you only let them go this far. They don't understand that in your intimacy room is nothing but junk, and you can't enjoy intimacy because your room's so full. They don't understand that in your love room, your emotion room, it is clouded by so many different emotions that causes confusion. And so therefore you don't even know how to be real with them because you don't know how to be real with yourself. yourself because your emotion room is so full. That's why God's so patient with us. Because the enemy is so clever and sly. And what it talks about is, with this temple, it talks about those that are coming in through the window or coming in through the open door, and how there's an open door that allows that junk in, and how we have to guard those doors. Well, as a child, we're not conscious enough to know how to guard those doors, and before you know it, people just start storing stuff in that room, and they just start cluttering it up, and then you grow up into adulthood and realize, man, it's kind of like a childhood home. You live in this childhood home. Mom and Daddy live in the home, and then maybe Mom and Daddy pass away. You inherit the home, and then when you inherit that home, you walk into this room and go, whoa, I never saw all this junk. Or you go into the attic and go, man, where did all this junk come from? And then you inherit the junk. Sometimes that's what parents do. Parents have allowed things into their room, and then they pass that junk onto their children because they think it's part of who they are, when it's really just junk. And God's trying to give you that time and that patience to work through it and clean everything out and go, that ain't going to help you, that ain't going to prosper you. You don't need 10 crock pots in your life. Get rid of all that. You don't need pictures from your grandma's childhood of where she colored a scratch on it, but get rid of that. And God starts revealing the things that people have placed in those rooms and says, clean it out, clean it out. And that's part of that process that's so hard, is for God to let him in and clean it out. But before we can let God clean it out, we got to stop letting anything else in it. Because before you know it, you've shut the window, but you've left the door open. You left just enough path to walk in that room. And every now and then you open the door and stick your head in. And what happens when you get hurt? You open that door, you throw it in, and you run and close it, close it, close it. And you try to close that door of emotion. We do the same thing emotionally in our life. Our room of emotions can be so full, and yet we still keep packing it full. Until it overruns into another room, and then to another room. And until it overtakes you. And it seems too big to conquer. And if something seems too big to conquer, guess what you'll do? You just learn to live with it. But that's why the Word of God says that nothing is impossible. And that through Christ Jesus, that we are more than a conqueror. And that we are overcomers by the blood of the Lamb. And just like these that have gone on before us in the great Hall of Fame of faith, there's nothing that you can't overcome or conquer with him helping you. There's nothing that you cannot tackle without him helping you. And guess what? You may not be able to work on multiple areas of your life or multiple rooms at one time because it's going to be overwhelming. So you open up one room at a time and you work on one thing at a time. If it's your marriage, if it's your childhood, if it's dealing with your children right now, being a father, whatever it is, you work on one thing at a time. And that's what I tell people. It's overwhelming when you try to take it as a whole. But when you break it down into rooms and you say, I want to be a better mother, I want to be a better wife, I want to be a better father, I want to be a better son, I want to be a better worker, I want to be a better whatever, and you start naming them all, you've got to start at one place. Work on that. Let God work on that and get it to a manageable place before you can start going to another room and working on that sometimes. Because if not, you're going to get overwhelmed and you're just going to stop. Have you seen the show Hoarders? Okay. I watched that show, and Amy and I watched it like, how? How do you get to that point? How do you get to a place where you're walking on a stack of this and you think it's normal? And we ask ourselves that. And to us that do not live that way, it's not normal. But to the person who has learned to live that way and cope that way, it's normal. For the same way with us, there are things probably that we live with and face every day that we've accepted, that on the outside people would go, oh, okay, and then they just walk on. But then when they walk on, they're like, wow, that's not normal. Why do they think that's normal? because you deceived yourself into believing it's normal instead of dealing with it. You deceived yourself to saying everybody lives this way. Nobody's really free. Because I think that's a lie that the enemy has put in the church of today. Nobody's really free. Everybody's got all kind of junk in their closet. So you're no different than anybody else. I don't want to be like everybody else. I want to be as free as I can be. I want to live in the freedom that God has for me. I love each and every one of you in here. But I don't want to live at your level, or at your capacity. I want to live at the capacity that God has for me. Because for one person, he may have this level. For another person, he may have another task. And so I don't want to live at what God has for you. I want what God has for me. I don't want to measure myself up to your standards. I want to measure myself up to His standards. Because your standards may fall short before God, but His standards will never fall short. And so we can't measure ourselves by other people either. We can let people encourage us all day long. We can let people speak life or death into us, and we can let them encourage us. But we still cannot measure ourselves according to them. Because if you ever measure yourself according to somebody else, you're still going to always fall short. Always. Last scripture. I'm trying to squeeze this one in. Revelation 2. Last book of the Bible. Revelation 2. And you guys will remember this because when we're teaching on the Church of Revelation, I still know that I have a couple of churches to finish. Sometimes it's good to take a break, though, when you're in a long series because people get bored with it and then come back to it later and it's fresh. Revelation 2, and we're going to look at verse 2 through 3. I know thy works, thy labor, and thy patience, and how thou canst not bear them which are evil. And thou hast tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and hast found them liars, and has bore and has patience with them, and for my name's sake has labored and has not fainted. Then it goes to verse 19, it says, I know thy works, and charity, and service, and faith, and patience, and thy works, and the last to be more than the first. What are you saying, Pastor? I'm saying through all of that, God still calls us to be laborers. Through all of our mess, through everything that we do, God is still calling us to work and labor. We've got to labor till He comes. Sometimes we've got to encourage ourselves if nobody else can encourage us. But we've got to labor till we come. And until He comes, there's a work to do, and we can't stop. We can't stop and just give up. I don't like things in life, always. I don't always like my circumstances in life. But if you stop, you're going to die. Or the people that depend on you are going to die. If I stop being daddy, if I stop being husband, if I stop worrying about anything that God has put me to be responsible for, and I stop worrying about it, guess what? I'm not the only one that suffers. The people that depend on me suffer too. If I stop showing up on Wednesday night, if I stop showing up on Sunday morning, guess what? It's not just me suffering. It's everybody in this congregation that depends on me to pastor them and to lead them in the right direction. And so just like we can't give up in the physical and we can't stop being daddies because our kids depend on us to feed them, or we can't stop being mama because I had a bad dream, and even though you want to sleep really, you can't stop being mama when they come to the room and say, Mama, I had a bad dream, and they're in tears, Mama, you can't stop. Or Mama, I'm sick, I need some fat toast. You can't stop being mama even though you're tired. It's a job to do. Why is it we give up on God so easy when things get hard? Why do we stop laboring when things get hard in the Spirit? If we truly believe that the Spirit side is so important, then how do we allow the enemy to put in our mind that it's okay to give up? That it's okay to just stop? That it's okay to just forget about it? We've got to keep our walk with God not, the enemy will steal every ounce of joy, every ounce of progress that you've made, every step that you've taken forward, if we do not hold it in priority, then the enemy is going to lead you to destruction. And he's going to accomplish what he set out to do according to John 10:10. And he's going to destroy you. And we're going to sit over here and sulk. We're going to sit over here and ponder and wonder and worry. Or are we just going to be the best that we can be and keep pushing forward and say, God, help me every day? Because you got to have patience. Because every day God's doing something. Every day that you live for him is another day, an opportunity that he's doing something in you or through you. He's either working on you or using you to work on someone else and to be an example to someone else. So don't give up. Don't just throw in the towel. While we wait on him, we got to be patient. We got to work on us, and we've got to continue to labor until he comes. Those are the three main things. Be patient, don't get weary. Let him work on us, and continue to labor while he works on us. It's like an athlete. They go and train every day. Why do they train every day? Because they want to get better and better. And then they go out and they perform, and then they come back and train some more. We got to learn to be athletes for Christ. And train. Go out and work, come back and train. Go out and work, come back and train. Amen? Amen. Amen. I hope that helped. And didn't get off course or anything, but I hope that helped. And I hope it helped some others. I see some others going, amen. So, wasn't quite the direction I was going in, but God knows what we need. Amen? Amen. Amen. Let's pray tonight. Father, thank you tonight for